I'm Mariah Jennings, 27, the funny cousin and part-time art teacher. The pews were already packed by the time I got there, clutching a diaper bag in one hand and a squirming 8-month-old in the other. The chapel was cold, the kind of cold that settles under your fingernails. I tried not to slip on the polished marble as I made my way up the side aisle, head down, hoping to find a seat near the back. But before I could even set the baby carrier down, Aunt Denise was at my shoulder, hissing, "Mariah, don't make a scene. You can't sit up here. This row is for immediate family." "I am immediate family," I said, trying to adjust the strap on my shoulder. "You're not the kind of family that needs to be front and center today. Just watch Ava. Please. We've got enough going on." And just like that, she was gone, swallowed into the sea of dark suits and lace veils, her perfume trailing behind like authority. I looked down at baby Ava. She blinked up at me with her slow, blinking baby stare. The soft pink of her face framed by a too-big headband bow. She was starting to drool. I sighed and dug through the diaper bag for a clean cloth. They told me to babysit. During the funeral, my uncle, my godfather, was being laid to rest, and I wasn't even allowed to stand with the rest of them. I had been his favorite. I used to send him paintings for his birthday, and he'd frame them like they were Monet. But now that he was gone, I was just the cousin who didn't have a husband, didn't have a kid, didn't have a career that anyone in this family respected. The organ started. That slow, aching hum, the kind that feels like it presses your lungs down from the inside. Everyone stood. I stayed seated, bouncing Ava gently on my lap, pretending not to notice the sideways glances. He always believed in tradition. The pastor began. I didn't hear the rest. Instead, I watched the altar, the photos of him framed in gold, the slideshow flickering on the screen above, and not a single photo of me with him. I shifted Ava to my other hip and walked out into the lobby. The crying room was empty glass window facing the sanctuary. Soft chairs, muted speakers. I sat there, rocking her gently, her baby scent like powdered milk and faint lavender. The service kept going. The prayers, the readings, the eulogies. Everyone taking turns remembering how he was strong, respectable, dependable. But no one mentioned how he used to hide gummy bears in his coat pockets for me during church. No one remembered how he came to my high school art show even though he had chemo that week. No one told my version of him. So I did something I hadn't planned. I walked back into the sanctuary. Baby Ava was awake, but calm, sucking on the corner of her sleeve. The aisle felt longer than it should have. The sound of my boots loud against the floor. Rows of people shifted, heads turned. I walked past Denise, who gave me a look like I had just dropped a beer bottle in the Vatican, but I kept walking, all the way up to the altar. The pastor stopped mid-sentence. I turned toward the crowd. I wasn't going to say anything. I wasn't even sure why I was doing this. But I walked up the 3 small steps and set Ava gently on the velvet-covered altar table beside a framed picture of him holding her the day she was born. Then I stood there, quiet. The room froze. Someone coughed. A baby whined in the back. The slideshow clicked to the next image, and then I heard a voice behind me, deep, familiar. "Is that Mariah Jennings?" Everyone turned. It was Judge Lane, my uncle's closest friend. He stepped out from the side vestibule in his black robes, his thinning hair neatly combed back, walking with the slow command of someone used to people falling silent. "I was hoping she'd be here," he said, "because before John passed, he asked me to deliver something. And it's about her." A ripple of silence spread through the room. I felt it, the shift, the feeling of every eye on me, not with dismissal, not with pity, but with something else. Recognition. If you've ever been the one they pushed aside, only to realize they never knew who you were to begin with. Drop a comment or tell me where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. The pastor stepped back. Even the choir stopped adjusting their hymnals. Everyone was waiting, and for the first time all morning, they were looking at me. The silence didn't last long, but it lasted just long enough to change something. Judge Lane walked forward, slow and steady, with a folded envelope in his hand. He stepped up beside me and nodded toward the baby, as if to say, she could stay. Then he looked out over the crowd. This letter was written 2 days before John passed. He said, he asked me to hold on to it until today. My heart was pounding. I could feel sweat gathering under my arms. Despite the cool chapel air, Ava was playing with the edge of the altar cloth now, oblivious to the tension hanging around us like storm clouds. Judge Lane turned to me and extended the envelope. It's yours. Mariah. He wanted you to read it when you were ready, but I think maybe today's as good a time as any. I took the letter. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. The paper was soft, almost like linen. My name was at the top, in his old blocky handwriting. Dear Mariah. It began. I didn't read it out loud. I couldn't. But I let my eyes skim over the lines quickly, hungry for whatever he had left me. You were the one who saw me when I was tired of being strong. You were the only one who asked if I wanted to keep fighting. You gave me art when the world gave me scans and pills. You're more than they see. Don't let them hand you a role and call it gratitude. Don't stay quiet because you were taught to be helpful. Take up space. My girl, take it all. Love. Your godfather. John. The last line nearly broke me. I had to swallow hard just to stay upright. I tucked the letter against my chest and looked out at the pews. No one moved. Judge Lane turned to the crowd. And just so we're clear, he said, John told me she was the only person he trusted with his legacy. And if you don't know what that means, maybe listen better next time someone brings the baby and the brush. There were scattered whispers. Uncle John had been a collector paintings, mostly, and one-of-a-kind pieces from unknown artists. People thought it was just a hobby, but what they didn't know, what even I didn't fully know, was that his collection had been willed to me. Not just his collection, his studio, his unfinished pieces, his art scholarship fund, everything. And Judge Lane had just outed it to the entire family, like it was gospel. Denise's mouth was a tight line. Her husband leaned over and whispered something in her ear. She didn't blink. I picked Ava up from the altar and held her close. She smelled like milk and church pews, like quiet trust. I walked back down the aisle, not fast, not slow, just steady. Each step felt heavier than the last. They looked at me differently now. Not better, not warmer, just different. Some nodded politely, a few looked away, 1 or 2 smiled, and one woman in the second row, a cousin I barely spoke to, reached out and touched my arm. He always talked about you, she said softly. I didn't know it was like that. I gave a tight smile and kept walking. Outside, the air was thick with summer heat. Bees hovered near the roses planted along the chapel fence. A lawn chair creaked in the distance as someone shifted. I sat down on the bench under the maple tree. The bark was rough under my palm. Ava kicked her legs in my lap. Her tiny socks were mismatched. I hadn't noticed that earlier. I shouldn't have brought you up there, I whispered to her. But maybe I should have. She gurgled in response and yanked a curl of my hair. I winced. It was weird how grief worked. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even sure what I felt. It wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. Just a strange hollow quiet, like walking through an empty gallery after closing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my mom. What was that? That was all it said. No greeting, no warmth. No, are you okay? Just what was that? I didn't reply, because I knew exactly what it was. It was me stepping out of the background. It was me being inconvenient on purpose. It was me showing up, not just as the babysitter or the helper or the girl who keeps her mouth shut and takes photos for the family group chat. It was me, holding the baby, standing in front of the altar, and saying, I exist. I had spent years making myself small for them, smiling when they interrupted, laughing when they forgot, carrying trays, babysitting toddlers, sewing hems, editing resumes, and pretending I didn't notice when they called my work little pictures. But I noticed, and Uncle John did too. That's why I'd bring Ava. That's why I stepped up, because someone had to remind them. I looked down at the baby again. She'd fallen asleep on my chest. Her tiny hand curled in the fabric of my black dress. I didn't want to go back inside. I didn't want to do the reception, or the speeches, or the awkward potluck dinner in the church basement where everyone would act like nothing had happened. But I would, because now, I had something they didn't. I had truth, and a letter, and a key. He'd included a key in the envelope, small, brass, cool to the touch, to the studio, the one no one else was ever allowed into. And as I sat there under the maple tree, a breeze lifting the edge of the baby blanket, I knew exactly what I'd do next. But that's for later. For now, I just sat in the quiet with Ava, the only person who didn't ask questions, didn't keep score, didn't wonder what I was trying to prove. She just needed me. And maybe that was enough. I drove home with one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently on Ava's car seat handle. She was quiet now, pacifier bobbing, her eyelids fluttering with the weight of exhaustion. I envied her. Babies don't get asked to explain themselves after funerals. The sun was dipping low behind the hills, casting golden light that flickered through the trees like blinking eyes. I was somewhere between numb and alert, running the entire day on a loop in my mind, Aunt Denise's voice, the cold aisle, the letter, the silence after Judge Lane spoke my name. I didn't go straight home. I turned down a side road, gravel crunching beneath my tires. I hadn't been to Uncle John's studio since I was 16. Back then, it was like stepping into a cathedral, brushes lined like altars, tubes of paint arranged with obsessive precision, canvases in various states of birth and decay leaning against the walls. I parked under the same crooked elm tree and took Ava out, careful not to jostle her. She blinked awake, but didn't cry. The brass key was still in my coat pocket. It was heavier than it looked. The front door of the studio looked untouched, like it hadn't been opened in months. The porch was covered in a dusting of pollen and two long-forgotten paint rags stiff with time. I stepped up and fitted the key into the lock. It clicked. The door opened with a creak, the kind you only hear in memory or movies. And then I stepped inside. It smelled like oil and cedarwood and something faintly sour, like turpentine and dried lemons. Light filtered in through the high windows, making the dust visible in golden shafts. It was exactly how he left it. A mug with a hardened ring of coffee sat beside a dried-out palette. A sketchbook lay open on the table, filled with swirls of ink and pressed leaves. His coat hung on a peg by the door. I didn't cry. Instead, I placed Ava down on a wide cushion that used to be his sitting bench and walked around slowly, running my fingers over the work tables, the worn knobs of drawers I once wasn't allowed to open. In the far corner, a covered easel waited, a white cloth draped over it. My stomach tightened. I pulled the cloth back, and I stopped breathing. It was a portrait of me, not recent, maybe painted 5 years ago, I was laughing in it, head tilted slightly, eyes squinting. He'd painted me in sunlight, with smudges of blue on my cheeks like sky reflecting back. The canvas was large, maybe 4 feet tall. He'd never shown me this, never even told me. There was a note tacked beside it. Mariah, this is the real you. Don't let them shrink her. My knees gave way. I sat right there on the floor, legs crossed, arms limp. For years, I had worked 2 jobs and painted in the evenings, making pieces no one bought, sharing them on Instagram only to be met with likes from strangers and silence from family. Denise used to say, "You're still doing your little hobby," right as if creativity was something I'd grow out of. But this studio, this key, this portrait told a different story. Uncle John saw me, not just when I was around. He had been seeing me even when I didn't see myself. I got up and walked to the filing cabinet. He always kept paper records contracts, gallery notes, old receipts. Inside were folders with names I didn't recognize, but one was labeled MJ Residency. I pulled it out. Inside were drafts of a letterhead, a mission statement, and a financial breakdown for a year-long artist residency. Named after me, the Mariah Jennings Residency Fund. I stood there frozen. I hadn't earned this. Or maybe I had, and no one ever told me. Behind me, Ava began to fuss. I walked over and picked her up, holding her close. Her warmth grounded me. "You hungry? Baby girl," I whispered. We drove home under the heavy sky, neither of us saying a word. The apartment was quiet when I opened the door. I laid Ava down in her portable crib, changed her diaper, and heated up a bottle. She drank with slow contentment, eyes half-lidded. I sat beside her on the floor, legs outstretched, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed again. Another text. This time from my cousin Leah. "You were amazing today. I wish I had your courage." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't trying to be courageous. I was trying not to disappear. I opened Instagram and posted a photo. Not of me, of the painting in his studio. Caption: "He saw me, even when no one else did." I didn't expect the messages that followed. Old college friends, strangers who followed my art page, even people from church. Beautiful. I felt this. I've been erased in rooms like that too. I stayed up late that night. I sketched for the first time in months, not for a client, not for a contest, just for me. I drew Ava asleep in her crib, the shadows soft around her nose, her fingers curled like flower petals. Then I started something new, a larger piece, tentative lines at first, then stronger, more certain. A woman at the altar, holding a baby. The crowd below her, blurred. Only the light was sharp. I didn't know where it would go, but I knew how it started. And for once, that was enough. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of formula and faint sunlight warming the hardwood floor. Ava was already babbling from her crib, kicking her little feet into the air like she was greeting the day with a personal drumline. I sat up slowly, muscles sore from the strange positions I'd curled into last night. My sketchbook was still open on the coffee table, a faint pencil line smudged where I must have leaned on it while half asleep. I hadn't planned on going back to the studio so soon, but something was pulling me there, like the place wasn't done speaking yet, or maybe I wasn't done listening. I packed Ava's things: diapers, formula, an extra onesie with little foxes, and we were on the road by 9:15. I didn't text anyone. I didn't ask permission. I just drove. This time, the air around the studio didn't feel so heavy. It felt almost expectant, like it had been waiting for me. I laid Ava down on the old settee by the windows, tucking a blanket around her, and began opening drawers, not rifling more, like searching gently. I found old sketches, some half-finished pieces of mine that Uncle John must have saved from years ago. Scribbles I'd given him as a joke, now pressed and preserved like sacred relics. In one drawer, there was a folder labeled Family. I opened it slowly, expecting perhaps some candid photographs or maybe estate documents. Instead, I found portraits, dozens of them. Denise, younger and sterner. Her smile caught mid-resistance. My mom, hair longer than I remembered, eyes sad but proud. Even cousins who had drifted far captured not in posed smiles, but in their truest selves, vulnerable, honest, imperfect, and one of me, again, younger, about 19, barefoot on a riverbank, sketchpad on my lap. I didn't know he'd been watching that day. I sat with that folder in my lap for a long time. Maybe he had been trying to say goodbye all along, in pieces, quietly, like he knew I'd find the message only when I needed it most. Ava stirred, and I fed her on the bench by the windows, letting the sun warm her feet. She looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes, like nothing in the world could possibly go wrong as long as I was here. I whispered, "Do you think they'll ever see me the way he did?" She blew a raspberry and grinned. I laughed. I hadn't done that in days. That afternoon, I got a call from Judge Lane. "Mariah," he said without preamble, "I've received 3 emails from various family members regarding your, participation at the funeral. Just wanted to check in." "Let me guess." I replied, "They want the studio back." He chuckled. Not unkindly, nothing quite so bold. More like confusion, denial. You know how grief gets tangled with entitlement. "Yeah," I said. "I know it well. You don't have to respond." He said, "John's will was clear, legally and morally. It's yours. But I want to prepare you. People don't like it when the narrative shifts. They never liked mine to begin with." I said, "Well," he said after a pause, "maybe now's the time to write it yourself." That stuck with me. After we hung up, I stood in the center of the studio and just listened to the creak of the ceiling beams, the distant rustle of wind through leaves, the faint sounds of Ava cooing to her toes, and underneath all of it, a kind of hush, the kind that felt sacred. I remembered something Uncle John once told me when I was 13 and had gotten rejected from an art contest at school. "They don't get to decide if you matter," he said. "That's your job." That night, I started drafting a proposal, a real one, for the MJ residency. I listed out what it would include: full studio access, a modest stipend, mentorship by working artists, and a final exhibition focused on emerging voices, especially those overlooked, underestimated, or underfunded. People like me, people like who I used to be, before someone saw me. I stayed up until 2 a.m., Ava asleep beside me on a pillow nest, her soft baby snores grounding me in the present. By the end of the week, I had a full draft. I sent it to a gallery contact I barely knew but who had once commented on my work. The next morning, she responded, "This is beautiful. Let's talk." I didn't know if it would become something, but the simple fact that someone took it seriously felt like a crack of light through a sealed door. The following Sunday, the family gathered again. This time, it was at Denise's house. Post-funeral meal. I wasn't going to go, but then I thought of that portrait of me laughing, and I thought, why not show up in person and still be laughing? I wore a bright blue dress, one Uncle John had bought me years ago, which I'd never worn in front of the family because it felt too loud. But that day, I wanted loud. Ava on my hip. I rang the doorbell. The conversations inside went quiet as I walked in. Heads turned. Someone coughed. Denise approached with a thin smile. You made it. I did, I said calmly. She looked down at Ava. She's grown. She's learning to own the room, I said, smiling. The meal was awkward. Of course. Stiff small talk. Questions laced with false innocence. So, Mariah, we heard you inherited the art space? I nodded, sipping my iced tea. Yes, and I'm launching a residency for emerging artists. A pause. Someone dropped a fork. Oh, that's ambitious. I smiled. It's real. They didn't know what to do with that. So I let them sit with it. Later, as I was packing up Ava's things, my cousin Leah came over again. She looked different this time, less unsure. Your proposal, she said quietly. I read it. Denise sent it around. Thought we'd all roll our eyes, I guess. But it made me cry. I blinked. You read it. She nodded. I studied poetry in college. Remember, dropped it because everyone said it wouldn't pay the bills. I just wanted you to know I saw what you're doing, and I think it matters. A breath caught in my throat. Thank you, I whispered. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the echo of something real growing in me. Not applause, not validation, but root. A week passed. Then 2. I settled into a strange rhythm: early mornings with Ava, afternoons at the studio, evenings answering emails I never thought I'd receive. People had begun to reach out: artists, mostly, and a few local journalists. They wanted to know more about the residency. They wanted to meet me, the girl who used to be asked to take the coats and hold the baby. And suddenly, I wasn't just holding the baby. I was holding something much heavier. A story, a name, a future. It was terrifying. One night, after Ava finally fell asleep, I opened the studio's old ledger. I hadn't meant to go through John's records, not in detail, but there it was, entry after entry of purchases, sales, letters exchanged with small-town galleries and young artists. Most of the names I didn't recognize. Some I did. On the last page, there was a note scribbled in pencil, dated just a few weeks before he died. She's the one. Let them laugh. Let her burn brighter. It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. I sat in the studio long after that. The door opened to the soft night air. Crickets chirped, and the stars outside blinked with that indifferent silence I'd come to love. The paint-scented air, the creak of old wood beneath me, it was all his. And now, somehow, it was mine. The next morning, I hosted my first studio visit. It was just 3 people, one local photographer, a ceramicist, and a high school senior with a sketchbook full of graphite dreams. I brewed coffee, printed name tags, and tried not to let my hands shake. I showed them the space, the shelves of canvases, the light that fell perfectly across the floor between 10 am and 2 p.m. And I told them about him, about John, about how he collected people more tenderly than he collected paintings, about how he told me to take up space. They listened, they asked questions, and for the first time in my life, I answered them with certainty. After the others left, the high school senior lingered behind. She had long braids and a quiet voice, and her fingers kept tapping the edge of her notebook like she was working up the courage to say something. I used to think I had to pick something safe, she said finally, but you make it feel like art is something solid. I swallowed a lump in my throat. It is. Even when no one says it out loud. Especially then. She nodded and left. I didn't cry until the door clicked shut. Later that day, as I was changing Ava's diaper on a makeshift table by the back wall, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Denise. We're hosting a memorial dinner next month. Immediate family only. Let me know if you want to send something. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, I'll be there. And I'll bring Ava. There was no reply. But this time, I didn't care. I had a new family now. Not blood, not marriage. A family of people who had once been sidelined, who had once been told their dreams were too fragile for the real world, and who were now stepping into rooms with their whole selves. I was still afraid. Of course. The fear didn't vanish. It hovered just beyond the curtain of each new decision. But there was something louder now, something rising beneath the fear. Conviction. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of a packed room at the local Arts Council meeting. I'd been invited to present the MJ residency as a community initiative. It wasn't just about money, it was about belief. In artists, in space, in second chances. I wore the blue dress again. This time, not as armor, but as truth. I started my presentation with a simple slide, a photo of John's studio bathed in golden light. Then I spoke. Not from a script, just from the place inside me that had once whispered, "You're not enough," and now said, "You were never supposed to be small." I talked about legacy, about inheritance, not the kind measured in dollars or land, but in courage. And when I finished, they stood, they clapped, and I felt the shift again. Just like at the funeral, but this time, it wasn't followed by silence. It was followed by invitation. 3 weeks after that, I received notice the residency had received initial funding from the city, a small grant but enough to launch the first year. Enough to get started. That night, I took Ava back to the studio with me. I held her close and walked through the space slowly, whispering to her about every corner like it was a bedtime story. "This is where the light hits in the afternoon," I said. "This is where we'll hang the first show. This is where I stopped hiding." She fell asleep against my shoulder. I sat on the floor, rocking her gently, and looked at the old portrait John had painted of me, the version of me he had always known. I had spent so long trying to earn a place at the table. I didn't realize I could build one, and maybe someone like me needed to, not to prove anything, but to make space. For the girls drawing on the backs of receipts. For the kids whose parents didn't believe in unpractical things. For the artists who never called themselves that because no one had ever told them they could. Ava stirred and let out a soft, contented sigh. I pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then I turned the lights off, locked the studio door, and walked into the night feeling, for the first time in years, entirely whole. I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. I just needed this. To keep going, to keep building, to keep being seen. Even if I had to do it with a baby on my hip and pain under my nails. Especially then. The memorial dinner was held in the back room of an upscale restaurant I'd never been invited to before. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, not even for John's retirement years ago. The kind of place with low lighting and long tables covered in white linen and water glasses filled before you sit down. When I walked in, Ava on my hip in a little cream dress. The hostess glanced down the guest list and hesitated. "Name?" she asked politely, already frowning. "Mariah Jennings," I said, adjusting Ava's weight. "Family." She scanned her list again, then nodded. "They said you might come?" Said you might come. That phrase lingered in the air like smoke. I followed her through the maze of clinking plates and murmured conversations until we reached the private dining room. A long mahogany table stretched the length of the space. Almost every seat was filled. Denise was at the head, in black satin, surrounded by her children and their spouses. They looked like a painting posed, perfect, and cold. No one stood when I entered. I walked to the far end and sat near Leah, the only person who offered a real smile. She reached for Ava's hand with a warm whisper. "You look beautiful, little one." I thanked her quietly and unbuckled Ava's carrier. She began to squirm, restless from the car ride. There was a slideshow playing again, on a small screen above the fireplace, same one from the funeral. Pictures of John with everyone camping trips, old Christmas mornings, holding every child in the family but mine. Except now, at the very end, there was a new image, the painting of me. It flashed for only a few seconds, but I saw it. A few others did too. I saw one of my cousins frown. Another turned her eyes away. Denise said nothing. The server arrived with soup. Someone tried to toast. There were speeches again, rehearsed and stiff. Words like pillar and patriarch tossed around like dinner rolls. Then Denise stood, a glass of red wine in one hand. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," she said, her voice calm and clipped. "John would have appreciated us gathering, quietly, respectfully, in his honor." I held Ava closer, and I know there's been a bit of confusion, she continued, about certain aspects of the estate. Several heads turned toward me, but I'd like to remind everyone, she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, that we are a family, and family sticks together. The implication hung like a blade. I said nothing. Leah glanced at me, tense. Ava began to fuss. I rocked her gently. Then a man at the center of the table, a cousin-in-law, I think. Someone who wore success like a badge spoke up. "Mariah," he said, "you've been getting a lot of attention lately. The studio, the grant, all this talk about a residency. Sounds ambitious." I looked up at him. "It is." He raised his eyebrows. "You sure you can handle all that with a baby?" The room went still. I felt Ava's fingers grip mine tighter. I straightened my back. "She's not mine," I said softly. "But she's not the weight you think she is. If anything, she's the reason I keep going." Silence. Then Denise laughed lightly. "Let's not make this political, Mariah. We're just trying to celebrate your uncle. My godfather," I corrected. That wiped the smile from her face. "Right," she said. "Your godfather." Leah's hand slid across the table, brushing mine under the cloth. Just a tap. Just enough to say you're not alone. I glanced at the photos on the sideboard, framed memories frozen in time, and I realized something. They had curated him, edited him into the man they wanted to remember. But the real version, the one who left me the studio, who painted me laughing, who saw me, all of him had been too inconvenient to fit into their script. I stood, not loudly, not dramatically. I just rose from my chair and picked Ava up, holding her in one arm. "I'm going to step outside," I said. Denise narrowed her eyes. Already I looked her in the eye. "You're right. I have a lot to handle. And I'd rather handle it than sit here and pretend I don't know what this really is." She opened her mouth, but I didn't stay long enough to hear it. Leah followed me out moments later. We stood by the sidewalk in the glow of the streetlights while Ava chewed on her sleeve. "You're braver than me," she said. "No," I replied. "Just done." We both laughed. As I buckled Ava into the car, Leah hesitated beside me. "If you ever need help with the residency," she said quietly, "I could volunteer. I don't know if I'm any good, but I want to be in the room." I looked at her. The girl who used to write poems in the margins of church programs. "You belong there," I said. She nodded, eyes bright. When I got home, I rocked Ava to sleep in the old wooden chair beside my window. Her breathing slowed against my chest, and the rhythm of her rest became my calm. I stared out the window at the dark sky. The city was quiet. My inbox had 5 new messages, all from artists who had heard about the residency. One was a mother who hadn't painted since giving birth 3 years ago. Another was a man who said he'd been told too many times his work wasn't real enough. I closed my laptop without reading more. I didn't need their words tonight. I had my own. On the dresser sat the letter. John's letter. I kept it beside a candle and a chipped mug he used to drink tea from. I hadn't memorized it, but I knew how it ended. Take up space. My girl, take it all. I whispered it out loud, not to myself, to Ava, to Leah, to whoever else might walk through that studio door someday, to anyone who'd ever been handed silence and told to make peace with it. The next morning, I'd begin drafting the first official invitation to the MJ residency, and this time, I'd write it in my voice, loud, clear, and unashamed. The first official application for the MJ residency came from someone named Daniel Ortiz, a quiet name in my inbox, buried between store coupons and unread newsletters. His subject line was simple: submission for consideration. I opened it on a Wednesday morning, sitting at the big window in John's studio while Ava napped in her portable bassinet, one tiny fist curled near her mouth. The room smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, and I hadn't even had coffee yet. Still, something in the way he wrote direct, a little shaky but honest, made me sit up straighter. He was 32, had spent the last decade painting signs for small businesses in exchange for store credit or gas money. Most people don't think that's art, he wrote. But I do. Letters are bones. Curves are voices. I learned how to draw by watching my mother stencil grocery lists onto reused brown paper bags. He attached 5 images. I clicked on the first one. It was a painting of a laundromat window at night. Bright from the inside, but lonely. Someone had written help in the condensation on the glass. By the third image, I was crying. Not because it was sad, but because it wasn't hiding. I replied to him within the hour, invited him to visit the space, told him I had no idea what kind of budget we'd have next year, but if he was willing to be part of the pilot, I'd make it work. His response came 10 minutes later. I haven't had a room to paint in since my mom died. Thank you. That afternoon, Leah came by. She was quieter in the studio than I expected, running her fingers along the shelves like she was afraid she'd break something just by being here. I brought cookies, she said, holding up a little box like a peace offering, and I made you something. She handed me a small notebook. The cover was thick watercolor paper, hand-stitched down the spine. On the front, in neat black ink, she'd written for the girl who brought the baby to the altar. I didn't open it right away. I just held it. You okay? She asked softly. Yeah, I said. Mostly. She sat across from me on the floor, legs crossed like we were 13 again, whispering secrets behind choir practice. You know they're still talking. Right. Of course. I said. I hear things. They think you're exploiting his death, using the moment to, I don't know, make yourself the center. I shrugged. Maybe I am. She tilted her head. Are you? No, I said after a beat. But I'm done proving that. We sat in silence. Ava stirred beside us, smacking her lips in sleep. Then Leah said something I hadn't expected. I've been writing again. I looked up. Poems. She nodded, and essays, and some weird monologue thing that might be nothing. I don't know what it is yet, but it's alive. I smiled. That's all it needs to be. We made tea. We played music. We stayed until the sunlight began to fade, and she left with promises to return the next week and help repaint the walls. After she left, I finally opened the notebook she gave me. Inside were short verses, drawings, quotes, observations from the funeral, a list of things that make someone real scrawled in the margin, and near the middle, a sentence written in bold, deliberate letters. Sometimes, a woman has to carry both the baby and the legacy. I closed the notebook gently. The next day, Daniel arrived. He was taller than I expected, with paint stains on his shoes and a nervous laugh. "This is the space," he asked, stepping inside. "This is it," I said. "It's not much yet. It's more than I've ever had." We talked for an hour. I showed him where the canvases were stored, how the light shifted across the room depending on time of day, the drawer filled with old brushes and the cabinet with tea and cheap instant coffee. He looked around, slowly, reverently. Then he said, "What do I owe you?" And I looked him in the eye and replied, "Just your work." He nodded, and I handed him a key. He took it like it was gold. That night, I received another message, this one from my aunt, the younger one, Aunt Camille. "I just wanted you to know John talked about you all the time. We didn't always listen. That's on us." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I sat in the dark with Ava asleep on my chest, and I thought about the altar. The moment everyone turned, the baby in my arms, the letter. I thought about what it meant to be visible, not famous, not celebrated, just seen. It's strange how memory works. I could still feel the cold marble under my shoes that day, the weight of everyone's disapproval like fog around my shoulders. But now there was this room, this child, this name, and a door, wide open. The residency launched quietly. No press release, no gala, just Daniel, just Leah, just me, and the voices we were finally learning to give space to. Ava said her first word the next week. Up. She was reaching toward the ceiling fan when she said it, palms out like she wanted to fly. I laughed and picked her up, whispering, "That's right, baby. Up. Always. Even if they told you to stay in the back. Even if they only saw you as the babysitter. Even if they never called your name. Up. Because when you climb high enough, even the people who once ignored you have to tilt their heads to look. And by then, you're not looking back." It was a rainy Thursday when Denise showed up at the studio. No call, no warning, just the sound of an umbrella tapping against the doorway and the sharp scent of her Chanel perfume arriving before her voice. I was on my knees, scrubbing dried gesso from the floor near the supply shelf. Ava was nearby in her baby jumper, kicking and squealing, her voice echoing against the studio walls like song. I stood slowly, wiping my hands on my paint-stained jeans. "Denise." She closed the umbrella, shook it once, then looked around the room like it was a gallery she hadn't meant to step into. "So this is it," she said. "The famous legacy." Her voice wasn't cruel, just careful, like she wasn't sure what version of herself to be here. I nodded. "This is it." She looked older than she did at the memorial, paler, her hair less tightly styled. The fatigue showed through the makeup this time. "I didn't come to fight," she added, eyes scanning the walls. "I wanted to see what he left behind, the part we never really understood." I stepped aside. "You're welcome to look." She walked slowly through the studio, pausing at the painting of me that still hung in the back corner. Her face flickered something between recognition and regret. "He never painted me like this," she murmured. "You never let him see you like this," I said, the words out before I could filter them. Her eyes met mine, sharp, but not angry. "I suppose not," she said finally. "We had our roles?" "Yeah," I said, crossing my arms. "We all did." Denise looked at Ava then, her face softening unexpectedly. "She looks like him." I tilted my head. "She's not his." "No," she said, "but she looks like how he held things, gently, even when they didn't deserve it." I didn't know what to say. She sat down on the bench by the window, next to Ava, who giggled and offered her a soft cloth block. Denise took it delicately, like it might break. I found something, she said after a moment. In his things. A recording. I stiffened. Of what him? She said. Talking. One of those voice memos on his phone. I didn't delete it. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a flash drive. He said your name, she continued. I didn't listen to all of it, but I thought maybe you should have it. I took it with both hands. It felt small, too small to carry what it might contain. Thank you, I said. Denise stood slowly, brushing invisible lint from her sleeves. He loved you, more than any of us wanted to admit. You reminded him of who he was before all this. Family performance. I nodded. He let me be messy. She smiled faintly. And we punished you for it. I said nothing. She turned to leave, her heels clicking against the floorboards. At the door, she paused. When the residency show happens, she said, I'd like to come. My throat tightened. It's open to the public. I'm not the public, she said quietly. I'm his sister. I didn't respond. She didn't wait for one. After she left, I stared at the flash drive for a long time. Then I plugged it into the studio laptop. There was only one file. I clicked. The recording crackled to life with a low hum. Then his voice. Raspy. Slower than I remembered. If you're hearing this, he began. I guess you're wondering why I left it all to her. I froze. Ava played on, unaware, her laughter mixing with the soft hiss of rain against the window. She's not the loudest, he continued. Not the one who demanded rooms or commanded tables, but she's the one who listened, who watched, who kept creating even when no one clapped. There was a pause. A faint cough. I don't need a monument. I don't need my name in lights. I just need someone to keep the fire going. And she will. Because she already has. I swallowed hard. My hand was shaking on the mouse. She'll be called too much, too emotional, too tender. That's fine. I hope she's all those things. Because the world needs tenderness more than legacy. Let them call it soft. She'll make it strong. The recording ended there. No goodbye. No music. Just static. And then silence. I played it twice. Ava crawled toward me, gripping the edge of my leg for balance. Her small hand pulled me back to the floor, back to the real world. I picked her up and pressed my cheek to her forehead. Did you hear that I whispered? We're going to keep the fire going. The first residency show was held on a rainy Friday in October, 5 months after the funeral. The studio had been transformed, walls scrubbed clean, lights adjusted, windows adorned with soft white curtains that fluttered in the breeze. We borrowed chairs from the community center. Leah baked cinnamon bread. Daniel hung his paintings on the west wall, each one framed in thrifted wood he'd sanded by hand. Ava was dressed in navy blue. She sat on my hip as the room filled slowly at first, then all at once. Artists, neighbors, teachers, people I hadn't seen since childhood, even a few strangers who had followed the story online. And Denise. She arrived near the end, wearing something softer than usual. Her eyes were rimmed with tears before she even made it through the doorway. I didn't speak at the event. I let the work do that. The walls were filled with voices, with color, with the kind of truth you don't explain, you just stand in front of it, and it changes you. One painting, a collaboration between Leah and Daniel, hung at the very center. It was a large canvas, divided in half. On one side, a woman, head bowed, holding a baby wrapped in gold fabric. On the other, the same woman, years later, standing in front of a group of people, brush in hand, her shadow long behind her. There was no plaque, no name, but everyone knew who she was. They stood in front of it, some in silence, some whispering. I stood near the back of the room, Ava asleep on my chest, her breath steady against my skin. No one asked me to move. No one told me I didn't belong. I didn't need applause. I didn't need a spotlight. I had the studio. I had the work. And I had a little girl who would grow up knowing that her first steps were taken on floors covered in paint and poetry. When the last guest left, I turned off the lights and stood in the dark with only the exit sign glowing red behind me. I whispered a quiet thanks. To John, to the silence that raised me, to the room that never asked me to shrink. Then I picked up Ava, and we went home.